Why self-life? We got London on the track. Nigga, hustles don't stop, they keep going. Yeah. You can lose your life, but it gon' keep going. Why not risk life, but it's gon' keep going? Yeah, when you got somebody else was born, but at least we got the same. We ran on the vision, we ran on the money, we ran on the vision, we ran on that money, we ran on the vision, we ran on the money. Yeah. We ran on the vision, we ran on the money, we ran on the vision, we ran on some money, we ran on some vision, we ran on some money. Yeah.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Cell Frame After Dark. Out here doing some hot takes, some history of blockchain, doing some cell frame talk, hanging out. Ready to welcome on anybody out there who wants to join in and talk. Just go ahead and do the request to listen. It's a nice day out here in Siberia, Akadem Gorodok. We had a little bit of spring coming in finally. You know, it's here in late April. Most people around the world are already well into spring. Maybe you're wearing shorts. Out here in Siberia, we still got down jackets on, walking around on ice. But finally, after a little bit of an unseasonably cold spring, we've got some sunny days. And we've got our first black kite spotted today in Akadim. It's an amazing bird of prey that travels around great distances and spends its summers up here in Western Siberia. Flies around even in the cities. It's cool to see them, and as soon as they're here, you know it's spring. We've got a little bit of cell frame news this week, not too much. The open beta test is ongoing. So all that action is now happening not in the closed beta group where you had to apply, but it's now in the cell frame dev channel. So you can see how that's unfolding. If you're not a Linux user with at least 10,000 cell ready to go and make a node, you can at least keep track of what's going on there. Shout out again to Mika, our great friend who's out there helping everyone out with the Linux and doing his own bug fixes. I've seen Dima in the chat, so everything seems to be going well. Open beta is going on. You can check in on that. Another news item this week, shout out to our web development team. We got the staking for V3 on Ethereum on Uniswap. That's all set up in the staking site for Cellframe, and now it's also set up for the Kel staking. So yeah, good job by the team. I think the V3 protocol just came out a couple weeks ago. We've already got that set up. Helps you with new features. We've got V3 staking lets you set a price range for trading for your liquidity. And it's a new new format for LP tokens on V3. So now they're actually in the form of NFTs. So this is the new ERC 721, I believe, protocol that the LP tokens are getting emitted on. It's interesting. Got me thinking about NFTs this week. Might get into that today. What else is going on? Yeah, so I started talking about Akadem Gorodok. I wanted to give you guys maybe a little more background. I mean, Siberia seems pretty exotic for a lot of people out there. You know, shout out to our friends in Iraq, or maybe you're on some island in the Pacific. Out here in Akadem, we're in the very heart of Eurasia. It's pretty much the farthest away you can get from any ocean, and it's what's called an extreme continental climate. So it gets very hot in the summer, extremely cold winters that just kind of set in and don't thaw. It's actually a really great place to live. I mean, the winters are actually, if you got the right equipment on, the winters are great. Only real bad time is like in the spring where kind of gets sort of muddy, you know, freezes and thaws every night. Every day it gets a little warm. All the ice melt, a bit of the ice melts, and you got puddles and they freeze. You got people walking on ice. So spring can be a little tough, but actually, Academ is one of the coolest places to live. It's built in the middle of the woods, uh, about 40 minutes away from the main city of Novosibirsk, and it's got a very rich culture in addition to kind of the amenities of the forest and kind of a nice college town vibe. The place was built back in the post-war period, and the Soviet Union made a big effort to create a scientific center here. I guess they didn't want to put all their eggs in one basket and have everything be in Moscow, so they created the Siberian Academy of Sciences, partially with the evacuation of people from St. Petersburg and other places in Western Russia. During World War II, you had tons of people come here, scientists. You had whole factories, so it was an industrial city. But Akadem is the academic kind of satellite for this whole post-Soviet project, and it turns out to be a really cool place. And one of the reasons was back in the 1960s, you had the so-called thaw era of the Soviet Union, where people got a little bit more the ideology post-Stalin. Khrushchev kind of did de-Stalinization. Things got a little bit more relaxed for a while, and Akademgorodok kind of emerged as one of these centers where different cultural events would take place that were sort of outside of the mainstream or the officially recognized culture. So at that time, you had a lot of what's called samizdat, where poets and writers and thinkers were doing self-published, just manuscripts, passing them around. When the audio tapes came out, that was big for music, underground music. But back in the 1960s, there was a club in Akadem Gorodok known as Integral or Pod Integralum, underneath Integral, where they would have sort of halfway official events. Famous concert here by a singer in 1960s who wasn't really approved by the states by the state, but got in a concert before they kind of shut everything down. So to this day, Academ has this cool mix. It's got a lot of kind of professor types, all these institutes, hard research, a place where Dmitry is an affiliate, is the Budker Institute of Atomic Physics is one of the big ones. All kinds of big research institutes here, and a lot of professor types walking around. Also, a lot of old hippies from the '60s, and a lot of young people because it's a college town. So I think so. One of the things that was in the news this week, or even from last week's AMA, was the fact that Cellframe got a bigger office. We moved into one of these towers that's in the tech hub, uh, locally known as the Geese, but is the Academ Techno Park. So we got a new, bigger office there, and we turned the old office into a studio space for doing all kinds of stuff. And we're going to run servers out of one of them, run nodes out of one of the rooms there, and then they're actually building a stage. They already started doing concerts there. So I feel like this kind of falls in line with the history of Academ. Interesting alternative venues. We're going to be presenting the events live from there. If you want to know more behind the scenes about all that stuff, just kind of see how the company's living, all that stuff, go ahead and check out our Instagram. So shout out to our Instagram, and everyone, if you want to get more behind the scenes kind of stuff about that, check it out. So yeah, there's ongoing beta testing. We got the new staking functionalities, expanding the staking this week. Uh, we had people in the community reach out to us about stuff they were noticing with a wallet. Like as I explained in the group, this wallet is part of an old partnership. So those funds that were withdrawn were theirs to take, and then in exchange we got back some very important assets that are going to be key for Self-Frame's development in the future. Obviously, not everything that we do in, business-wise can be disclosed. There's NDAs and stuff like that. So just need you guys to chill at this point. I mean, the marketing is on track. We're have big plans. We're already working on some stuff, and the big marketing push is going to be post mainnet. So when mainnet, when marketing, just you're gonna guys got to just chill out, and the mainnet is on its way with the open beta, and the marketing plans are in the works. The company is financially solid. They've been around for a long time. They got different sources of revenue. They got Tokenomics 2.0, which has been out for a long time now. So I think everything is basically on track with that. Just a big storm made out of a teacup. Is that how it goes? Anyway. Yeah, that's the Self-Frame talk for today. If anyone wants to jump in here, ask more questions, that's always good. I got a few things I want to talk about. Probably keep it short today. Not too much Self-Frame news right now. What are you know, I always like to go out and see what's happening out there on the internet. What's in the news this week? You know, we got the whole everyone's watching the ongoing drama of the US and global financial markets and financial institutions. You know, the market is kind of moves on little news here and there. Overall, you know, I'd say the picture is a bit gloomy for the economy as a whole, maybe looking at a recession. Obviously, nobody wants that, but you know that's the way the economy works these days. You got these recession cycles. You got the central banks trying to fight inflation. They need a recession to fight inflation. You know, that story is all ongoing, but nothing major in the works, as far as I can tell. Just everyone's still not sure if we're in a bear market. Crypto-wise, I think we really are seeing that decoupling I keep talking about, where I think Bitcoin is and other Web3 assets are being seen more and more as a kind of a flight to safety, rather than being tied to sort of the Nasdaq and tech stocks. You know, we're seeing more kind of outcomes of layoffs in the economy. The tech layoffs, I think most of the big ones have been announced, but that was a big wave. Seems like what was happening during the bull market was that basically tech companies were hoarding talent. You got all these stories about people just having jobs where they weren't really doing much. Maybe they weren't even given that much to do, but the companies had just hired them because there was a deficit of talent on the market. So, you know, things are shaking out, but I think things are looking very bullish for Web3, for decentralization as a whole. Some people out there are saying they smell altcoin season. You know, I think that's good for us at Self-Frame. We're not one of the big altcoins, as you can see by our relatively modest market cap at this point, but it is altcoin season. And I've heard, I saw some people on Twitter saying, you know what, this kind of casino era of the markets in general, and maybe the crypto markets in particular, is an end as far as this commentator was concerned. He's going to look more at fundamentals and the real value propositions that are out there on the market. And I think that basically Self-Frame, if you do a ratio of market cap to value proposition, would probably come out on top We've got some real hardcore value propositions, as we've talked about, with the whole idea of a service-oriented blockchain and being able to run all kinds of incentivized distributed services on blockchain networks, utilizing people's individual computers to do calculations, to store, manage, and transfer data, all that kind of good stuff. VPN service, shout out KelVPN. As always, my voice is coming to you via KelVPN today. So yeah, the general economy, I think things are nothing too major, but we got these trends solidifying where crypto is a bit more bullish. I'd say a lot more bullish than the rest of the tech sector and sort of the whole financial economy. One thing that's interesting about that I've noticed and others have pointed out about the crypto market is that it's more reactive. The whole idea of like, okay, some people say it's too volatile, you're risking it. That volatility also makes it more reactive, and it's kind of the first shoe to drop in a bear market, and then the recovery is also quicker, right? So we had all these tech layoffs from Facebook and stuff, and but actually the layoffs from the layoffs in the big crypto brands happened earlier, before kind of the rest of the tech industry got busy with layoffs. So I'd say that it's a good spot right now for Cellframe and for crypto in general. Um, Other news, Musk is always in the news. Like I said, this man's a genius. Everything, he's constantly, all his projects are constantly dominating the news cycle. So whatever whether his rocket blows up or Twitter is doing well, or Twitter removes blue checks, or Twitter is doing badly, or anything, this man gets his name out there and promotes his projects and his brand. So shout out to Elon. He got his rocket blown up, but and everyone's following it. But a successful test, of course. Yes, failures are where we learn the most. Isn't that right, folks? But one thing that's kind of hidden this week is maybe not hidden, but uh, overshadowed by all the rockets and the blue checks is actually Elon is getting into AI. Of course, as we mentioned, it's always the big companies that get into AI. The little guy can't get in, so that's why Cellframe is building a distributed AI training and running platform that can use the blockchain infrastructure to harness a network of computers that you otherwise couldn't do. Most AIs are run on kind of huge, they're not on the cloud most of the time. These individual big companies have huge servers that they're running these AI on. I think I heard a stat that it costs about $700,000 a day to run ChatGPT. No, that seems too much. Maybe a month. Anyway, you got these huge server costs. But yeah, so the new big player in AI that's been announced is Elon. He's going to have his own AI project, and I knew it. All this stuff about doom and gloom, AI is going to kill us all. That was just him talking up his bag. Good job, Elon. Welcome to the AI game. We've got our own project going up in that game. A lot of cool stuff being done with AI, and then a lot of hype, obviously, too. But it's also exciting times. What else is going on? Coinbase thinking about moving out of America. Looks like the US regulatory climate is getting a little bit darker for crypto. I think it's been building up for a while. I think people were pretty optimistic a bit earlier about how the regulatory environment might unfold. But at this point, things are looking a little bad in America. We had another big event kind of in the terms of mainstream's view of crypto, where the New York Times published a big so-called expose on how much power usage is being used by Bitcoin mining operations in the United States. A lot of these are in Texas, where the electricity is cheap. Unfortunately, those are also like in a very hot climate, so you have to spend even more electricity to cool all these server farms. Some people say that the New York Times article was a hit piece. They started responding by saying that actually the New York Times is really bad for the environment because they cut down all these hundreds of thousands of trees to produce their paper that people mostly don't even read and tend to throw in the garbage. So yeah, we got a little bit of maybe bad regulatory news for crypto mining in America. Meanwhile, other countries are expanding it. I think maybe once the economic figures start to come in and Americans realize that they're losing out on Bitcoin mining to other countries, maybe the regulatory environment can change rather quickly. One thing this is a weird idea, but living in Siberia, this came into my head. Proof of work, obviously, Ethereum has gone away from it. The Bitcoin maximalists tend to defend it really hard. They see that it has an intrinsic value in itself in terms of the energy output. I think Michael Saylor likes to talk about how Bitcoin is sort of embodied energy, how you can transfer energy across the world using Bitcoin. We at Cellframe are proof of stake. I think Dmitry mentioned that they might do a kind of another project using a proof of work. So I guess he sees some value in that as well. It'd be interesting to ask him next time on the AMAs what he thinks about proof of work versus proof of stake. But yeah, but proof of work, right? So Bitcoin is obviously extremely powerful. The Bitcoin community is committed to the proof of work thing, and they say that you can basically put these mines. You can do Bitcoin mining in ways that aren't a net waste, right? If you see it as waste, not a net waste of electricity. So they propose, for example, there's a lot of natural gas flaring that happens in oil extraction, any kind of, or gas extraction, hydrocarbon extraction from underground. There's a lot of gas that's just burned because there's no way to transfer that energy from out in like way out in some oil field to back home, back to the users, right? So they would propose, or they've already done this a lot. They put out Bitcoin mining rigs that can capture that energy that's wasted, and because you can Bitcoin mine from anywhere in the world, right? But here's my idea. This is a $1 million idea. Why don't you just, as far as I know, I have to talk to a physicist about this, but as far as I know, every every unit of energy that goes into an ASIC, spinning disks, whatever, all that has to be eventually emitted as heat energy, right? And then we end up having to cool these rigs in order to keep them running. But why don't you use them to heat a home, right? Think about this. You would have a little heater, and when it's cold, you just flip it on, and it heats your room. And then at the same time, you're also earning Bitcoin. Why not? Trap that energy that's used inside a home or any other building that needs to be heated. Voila, proof of work, energy efficient. I'm not exactly sure that's the way it works. The energy can, I guess it's transferred into kinetic energy and not directly into heat, but you know, just a little bone there for the proof of work guys. I think it's $1 million idea. Just giving it out for free. Make a heater, a space heater with a Bitcoin mining rig in it. Yeah, some other news here. I think I'm about wrapping up with that news item section, but interesting that the metaverse is dead. I think that was one of the headlines. Mark Zuckerberg decided to essentially can the whole meta thing. They were so excited after they bought, I think, Oculus, and they're like, yeah, we're going to rename our whole thing Meta. Everything's going to be in the metaverse. And then the actual metaverse wasn't all that fun. You're just like looking at a bunch of shitty avatars with weird eyes. And no one really wants to sit around in a room and just, or a fake room with a screen 2 inches from their face and look at other shitty avatars. Ouch, sick burn on the whole metaverse. Hey guys, if you like VR, I think it's probably got a lot of potential. Played it a few times, few games, but I don't love it. But I think it's early days. But yeah, so Zuck is now getting into AI. Seems like Meta is everywhere, but a little bit behind. Yeah, so fun times in the tech scene, but uh, we got our self frame project here, and we're gonna be making a big splash here soon. Right. So back to my little philosophical discourses, as are traditional in this series. So yeah, I was thinking about NFTs because I was noticed that the new protocol for V3 staking, now available for Sell and Kel, actually is an NFT format. So instead of emitting ERC20 fungible tokens for each individual liquidity pool, Uniswap is now emitting NFTs as on a single standard ERC721 as your LP token. So you've got an interesting, NFTs. The more and more you hear about them in the news, it's not so much about avatars and digital art. You're seeing it more and more for other uses, whether that be real estate. That's one that has a lot of things in it. A lot of projects already live in terms of real estate tokenization, tokenization of real world assets. But I wanted to talk about NFTs back in the context of art because they haven't, I guess the peak of the bull market, the NFT hype got so crazy. So many people released projects. People started pumping their projects like crazy. But I think we got a little, I think it's like many things. I like to take a big step back from it a little bit because one thing that kind of bothered me is someone who actually studied art history for a long time. People were kind of on the height of the whole NFT craze. People were kind of going online and saying, talking about, oh, the history of digital art, as if it began with the crypto punks or something, right? Or bored apes. Now, if you don't know, the history of digital art is much longer. So let's go back a little bit. So obviously, for a long time, what is art? How do people value objects and uh, art? Um, if you go way back to the olden days, back in if you would maybe say the Christian period, right before the Renaissance, and kind of more when society and value kind of unhinged from the whole Christian ethic. Art didn't really have intrinsic value per se. Um, Obviously, a very luxuriously carved work, whether that be out of ivory or gold, or maybe it's just got a lot of work put in it, that had a use value and had a kind of an intrinsic materials value. But there was no such thing as like collecting, right? If you had like a amazing painting of Jesus and the saints, maybe with a gilded frame, um, that could be hung in a church, looked at by people, by worshipers. You could have a portrait hung in a rich man's house. That could be kind of used by people or used by the owner to project his wealth that he was able to hire this artist. Then you had more in the modern world, people started to collect individual works of art, right? And then that's when the whole idea of authenticity comes into play. And for a long time, you have the history of easel painting. That's kind of like people think of painting as like this whole thing, but that specific format of painting on a canvas on an easel, that started a lot of, that's kind of the main example of art and collecting for us, right? So if you own a Picasso, you've got that signature of Picasso on the bottom of the painting, and that is the kind of carrier of value, right? Picasso only created a certain amount of individual artworks. His value is now being defined by collectors and the possession of that specific individual item. And with the kind of a certificate of authenticity, perhaps, or perhaps just the authenticity conveyed by the signature of the artist, right? Then things get more complicated when it gets down to printed media or replicatable media, right? So that actually came out in the age of printing. But then with photography and modern art, once, after kind of the modernist and sort of the era of Picasso, early 20th century, you started moving forward, you started to have people doing printmaking and photography. So these are things that can be replicatable. And now you have this idea of an edition. So a photographer or a printmaker could say, create a scarcity and an authenticity for their production, for their works, by this editioning and signing. And so the way that works in the museum system is you have an authenticated certificate, that lists the edition, the number, and you've got, the artist will actually sign the back of the printed edition. Uh, that conveys that this is only one of 10. If you just go ahead and print that same photograph on a nice piece of paper, sure, you can hang it up in your room. It'll look great, but there's no, it doesn't have that collecting value, right? So this is already kind of an interesting system where we imbue works by an author, we give them the right to set an edition, and then we create the scarcity. It's already kind of a bit of an elaborate system. Um, and with digital art, that got more complicated because there's no original negative, right? So with a photograph or with a print, you have either your original print, like your steel plate or whatever you're printing off of, or you have the original negative that the photograph was shot on. And then, then there's the addition. So those are different values applied to the negative, and then maybe even the first number one in the addition might be more valuable than number 10. All these complicated ways in which we kind of create scarcity of duplicatable objects. And then with digital art, things got more wild because when digital cameras came out and stuff like that, people started making a lot of video art. This happened in the 60s, going on to the 70s. These artists making sometimes very strange videos where it doesn't really seem like there's any production value, but they really have something to say within the discourse of art. So actually, digital art has been editioned for a long time, way before NFTs. Back, you would have collectors and museums purchase, say it would be the same way as with photography, except there's no original negative, right? So an author would edition their work, digital, video, or maybe it was sound art, and you would again have people collecting those originals, and then a copy. You could enjoy the video or the audio, but you wouldn't be able to say that you own it. And NFTs obviously have come in to occupy an interesting niche here, where, and one interesting thing about all this stuff is how actually do authors get paid. Back in the early days, people didn't really get paid for their work, except for, say, it was ephemeral, right? Musicians would just perform, and then maybe they would have a patron. They would have audience who might pay for a ticket to their live performance, or they might, just perform privately for the king or something, and then that they would have a patron, and then you had the copyright system. So once you had, anyway, I can get in a little bit on that in a bit. But basically, NFTs now make it real easy to publish digital art not as a copyrighted work, but as an original or as an edition of an original, right? So that's an interesting model, an economic model for artists and creators. So I think, even though I personally think that most of the NFTs that got really famous and expensive suck, I really hate the way those damn monkeys look. I think they're just bad art. I'm sorry if you own an ape. Good for you. You probably made a bunch of money on it, or maybe you lost a bunch of money, but I don't really love it. But as a way of funding art, as a way of funding culture, I think it's really interesting. And actually, there were a lot of interesting digital art kind of experiments before NFTs. One a video artist they got named Matthew Barney, who got famous in the 2000s. He had an interesting structure for financing his art. So he would make a movie, and he was already in touch with galleries. He was already kind of in the art world, had a name for himself, but he was still young. So he made his first movie on his own money that he made from being a model. Interesting guy. You guys check it out, Matthew Barney. He made his first movie, and he made 10 DVDs, right? So this is digital art, but it's on a medium. It's not just living on the internet because you want that scarcity. He made that edition of 10 and sold them each for, say, $10,000, right? And then that was his budget. He needed $100,000 budget to film movie number 2. So he had a whole plan of 5 films that he wanted to do, and they kept getting bigger and bigger budget because each time he would take those DVDs, sell each one of them for like a bunch of money to galleries, and then that would be his budget. So interesting. In the kind of that was also in the early days when pirating was big. Now kind of some of these big video producers have created convenient ways to let you watch a bunch of movies and get money for it without kind of overcoming the piracy issues. But back then it was an interesting move where he didn't have to try to release his movies. He didn't have to try to sell retail copies using the copyright system. He just went entirely around the whole copyright issue by creating an edition and by selling editions. And so now we've got NFTs. There was also an interesting project where the Wu-Tang Clan released an album that was only on one disc. This like weird rich guy, forget his name, who got in trouble for like manipulating drug market prices, bought it for over $1 million, I think. So yeah, I'm excited to see the way that the art market evolves in the NFT space. And it's also interesting that it's not really so much about copyright, right? I mean, obviously with digital images, copyright is almost like there's no, there was a whole lot of talk about digital rights management back in the 2000s, where there would be like the DVDs would be locked. There would be no way to copy anything, or there'd be no way to copy a DVD that you maybe purchased from a film studio. But with a digital image, you can screenshot it, and that's actually called, in the copyright sphere, that's called the analog gap, where no matter how hard you try to protect the copying of a digital file, even if you completely like encrypt it, if you want someone to be able to watch it, you have to project it on a screen. And the moment that it's projected on a screen, you can then copy the screen, right? So the whole digital rights management idea is kind of fallacious because there's no way to really lock down like a visual or an audio digital file. The whole history of copyright. I mean, I guess I have to out myself. I'm a bit of a free use advocate. I like the idea of people just sort of giving up on trying to control digital rights. If you're a content creator, just try to get patrons or something, or do live performances, or Patreon and stuff. It's so easy. But the whole idea of copyright is actually interesting, and I'm just going to keep going with my spiel. I don't think anyone wants to jump in right now, so I hope you guys enjoy it. All right, so history of copyright. I've done some digging into what is, if you want to go way back into history, and this kind of is going to tie into Web3. So, start with NFTs, but I'm going to go back to the idea of Bitcoin and kind of non-fiat currency, because the idea of fiat is tied to images in a weird way, right? I guess you can imagine that the coin or the dollar bill is stamped with an image of authority, right? So the copyright and currency and if all go back down to this idea of authority, and how do we interact with power and that authority? How do we interact with the objects that represent that power? So if you look at kind of histories of copyright going back, they go back into usually the 19th century and the idea of the romantic author, right? So like I mentioned before, kind of in the Christian era or earlier eras, classical era, there wasn't really this idea of authorship. So you have ancient poets, right? I mean, we try to make it seem like Homer is like a guy who wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, whereas in reality, he was just part of an oral tradition, right? Whoever he may have been, or if he lived, and even written traditions were not, once we got past the oral tradition, written traditions didn't really have the concept of authorship, right? Because so we have obviously ancient authors that we read, but our whole idea of like a unique text being produced by a single person, and then that text isn't to be changed, right? It's to remain in that form and spread and kept in that form. Earlier, like medieval authors and classical authors their texts would more or less maybe reinterpret an old text. You have the whole tradition of Renaissance poetry, which were translations, translations of the classics, of the Greek and Latin classics, were one of the big literary genres of that time. People kind of saw text as being more fluid. In the religious traditions, they were mostly, commentaries on the original text of the Bible, right? And this is kind of where I would go with this in terms of if you want to really dig deep into where this idea of authorship comes from, you got to go back to God being the original author, actually. So the Hebrew tradition, the Jewish tradition is obviously at core to the whole Western tradition, Judeo-Christian, Abrahamic, Islamic faiths. And so the ancient Hebrews actually had this relationship to their text where, the actual letters and the words on the page were kind of handed down by God himself, right? You couldn't just translate the Bible, you know what I mean? Like you can't do a free translation of the Bible. You, a mortal, sinful human, would probably fuck it up, or would definitely fuck it up, right? And the whole YHWH, those are the four letters that represent Yahweh, God, in the Jewish tradition. Those are kind of like imbued with almost like a mystical power, a little bit. And so this is an interesting conundrum, right? You had God writing in Hebrew, and then you had to translate it in the Christian era. when they, obviously for the Christians, they had their New Testament, which was already written in Greek, but the Greek, the common language of a lot of people in the Mediterranean at the time. And then, yeah, so they had to translate the Hebrew Bible into the Latin, so they could publish their Latin Bible with the New Testament attached. And they set up this whole amazing thing where there were 40, this happened in Alexandria. They hired 40 monks to sit in they basically locked them in different cells in this building, and they were all told to translate, and then miraculously they all came up with the exact same text. So this was this divinely inspired moment, right? So you can see kind of this idea of authorship already happening, where there's this attachment to the original text, and in order to translate it, you basically had to have a miracle happen. And kind of the same thing happened with the translation of the Greek New Testament into Latin. You had Saint Jerome. You can see this guy in a lot of Renaissance paintings. He's usually like a really jacked, half-naked guy sitting with a book and a pen. I think there's sometimes a lion next to him. And this is also this moment of miraculous. The saint had to translate the original Greek into Latin. And so this idea of like a control over the text, right? It's also the authority of the powers of the priestly classes that could preach this text, could interpret it. They had a certain group of people that had to interpret it, and then that essentially all broke out in the Reformation, where you had Luther, when basically the big sin, his big crime, one of his big crimes against the church in the eyes of the church, was doing his own translation of the Bible. And you had this guy named Tyndale in Britain who was actually burned at the stake for translating the Bible. So you had, long before copyright and long before laws about reproduction and authors' rights, you had people being burned at the stake for producing translations and derivative works of things that had to be controlled. And so I see this relationship to text, as being it's a little bit of idolatry. And this is a word that I'm going to expand on a little bit. I got some time. Yeah, we got time, whatever. Just here shooting the shit with you guys. I would say that, yeah, this relationship is kind of like an idolatry when you imbue this object, right, with supernatural powers. That's essentially what the Christians were critiquing the Greeks for, and the Romans, that they believed actually that some god was like Zeus actually lived in this giant golden statue of Zeus that towered over you, in central Athens. And that was, they say, that's idolatry. We believe that God, is everywhere. The Holy Spirit is between between people or whatever. And you're basically you're basically not a rational person. You're using magical thinking if you are doing idol worship, right? If you're imbuing an object with some kind of godly authority, only God, this invisible, all-powerful being, actually has that authority. And actually, there was a big debate. Can we translate? In the East, in the Byzantine world, they actually translated the Bible. So there's a difference between the West and East, and the big split of the two churches. Back to the Slavs. They one time, it was in I think 9th century, they attacked Constantinople, and Greeks got super freaked out, and they immediately sent missionaries to go try to Christianize these people, because they're like, oh my gosh, these northern barbarians, if they come back, we're fucked. So they go ahead and translated all their stuff, whereas in the West, translations weren't allowed, and everyone had to learn Latin. And that created different structures for the way literature spread in those countries. You had these priests essentially only knew Latin. But anyway, yeah. So this this idolatrous, I would say, relationship to text. You know, I think that the same thing it can be kind of said in our relationship to fiat money. All right, bear with me here. So what is fiat, right? What is money? We had barter, we had like maybe some basic barters that things were easier to barter with, like ingots, tin, maybe you could barter some gold jewelry. But then really in the classical age, the age of empires, was when we had start to have gold coins with the emperor's face on it, right? And that's when real fiat started. I mean, even though it still had so-called intrinsic value, the state was exerting its authority over it, and that was an image stamped on there, right? So images and authority have always been in relation. And how did they do it, right? They would maybe stamp the face of the emperor, and then like an eagle, like the Roman centurion's eagle or something on the back. Kind of this great ancient symbol of power and authority, the eagle. We still got an eagle on the back of a dollar bill. Got a dollar bill in my hands right now. We've got the American eagle, bald eagle spreading its mighty wings. It's got a bunch of arrows in one hand and a branch in the other. There's some crazy array of stars above him. The United States of America is written on here twice. Got some crazy pyramid, which I guess is a Masonic symbol. I don't know. These early American statesmen, they loved all kinds of old stuff like Egyptian mythology, and I don't know. You'll have to go to all the crazy conspiracy theorists out there to learn more about what's on the back of a dollar bill. But yeah, so fiat currency, fiat, right, is was when somebody by fiat, when somebody decrees something. In this case, it's always the sovereign of some territory that decrees that this is money, right? So again, it's almost a little bit like what I was talking about with the text and the idolatrous relationship to it, in that we're asked to believe that this money, or we're asked to respect the authority of this image that's being planted on there. And in the Byzantine times, they would have the emperor, and they would have like Jesus blessing him, right? So not only is he exerting earthly authority, there's like he has a crown and a scepter in his hand or something like that. He's also appealing to the authority of God. And actually, there was a big civil war in Byzantium over whether that's appropriate, whether images of God are appropriate. But eventually, we came back to the old system where, yes, we are going to show a picture of God, of Jesus. Incidentally, there's like a bunch of weird theological arguments about why we're allowed to have icons, even though the Old Testament said you shouldn't have images of God. They say, well, Christ, when he was incarnated, he was an image. Anyway, so all this stuff about authority, and kind of with fiat, we're asked to believe, we're asked to respect this authority in this dollar bill that's stamped there. And now I'm not coming on to this from a point of view of gold, even though the gold bugs, even though they're always talking about, yeah, fiat sucks, gold is intrinsic. But I don't think we can go back to bartering with gold dust, right? Like in the Wild West. Money is all based on a social contract, essentially. It's always going to be, whether that be fiat or, with Bitcoin, it's social contract that people value this output, right? Some people say, oh, the intrinsic value of Bitcoin resides in the mathematics behind it and the output of energy that goes into it. But in any case, what's interesting about Bitcoin is that it doesn't have an image on it, right? This is kind of blew my mind when I thought about it. I was like, whoa. All money, of all fiat money is has represented, whether it's digital or not. There's always this image. Every country, when there's new currencies out, they're always like, oh, who should we put on the money? There's always these symbols of authority, stamp of the national bank, a pyramid, an eagle. Bitcoin does not allude to. It's kind of like ascetic in this kind of back and forth between having images, not having images. Bitcoin is a little bit iconoclastic, I would say, right? It's ephemeral. It's only really, people. It's always funny. You can buy little gold Bitcoin coins or whatever. No, they're stupid. Bitcoin. The cool thing about it is that it's immaterial. It's based on people's just agreeing with it. We're not appealing to a higher power and pasting it onto the token and being like, yes, this is valuable. Believe it. Check out this eagle. Boom. Right? Full faith and credit of the US is printed on there. So in God we trust, right? $1. So Bitcoin, it's immaterial. It has no sovereign that it appeals to. Really, the power that it appeals to is the power of the community. The fact that we agree to use this, and that we have this limited supply, that's cool. That helps us use it as good money. But ultimately, people decide what it is, and so this is what I think is kind of this relationship to the image that's in relationship to things that's more rational and less in this kind of old magical thinking, right? That somehow this printed image with these symbols of power are money because somebody said so, right? Bitcoin, Web3, self-frame tokens are money because we say so. It's not appealing to a higher order, and that creates a different relationship to the object. You're not in reverence of it. You're not bowing down to it. You're not in fear of it. You kind of use it to connect with what's really the ultimate power, which is the people in this world, right? So that's why decentralization, putting finance into the hands of people without middlemen, without fiat systems, without an authoritative voice, without an authoritative image. And so our relationship to that object. So, people say dematerialization. Bitcoin is manifested in bits on computers. Those are physical things. They're things with electrically charged items, in hardware. So this is an image of value. That's ultimately what money is. So Bitcoin is an image of value, but it's a truly moral image of value, I would say. Kind of like the way that the early Christians might say, we don't want to make a statue of God, right? But say we can represent him by the sign of the cross. We're not really into this whole idolatry thing. We're not really into bowing down to statues of Zeus that purport to have actual Zeus living in it, right? But we are engaging with a kind of a higher power or a higher authority by having these symbols in circulation. So that number, that kind of dematerialized Bitcoin, which has no image, no stamp of authority, self-frame tokens. I think that is an interesting change. We are now entering into maybe a new era of relationship to money, which can be very empowering. I think we all know that's why we're in Web3, that we can do a lot more cool stuff as a community. We can, without appealing to authority, which, as we know, tends to fail. Bitcoin came out of the banking crisis of 2008, crisis of faith. This whole idea of the full faith and credit of a government, the stamp of the eagle, the dead president. We've lost faith in that, and we don't want to bow down to these fiat stamps. I think the people are more and more coming to that conclusion. And this isn't really anything against the power of the state. It's just about how do we relate to value. Is there an immediacy to exchanges of value, or does it go through a triangle, this pyramid up to the top, and then back down to the next person? So peer-to-peer transactions within a decentralized non-fiat system, I think, have a very deep inherent power if you go back to it. So now, what do we got to do? We already got this thing going, this new type of relationship to money, to value, an immediacy, a personal responsibility to hold this value, a kind of a communal agreement on what we value instead of top down. And Self-Frame fits right into that. So all we got to do is build a better blockchain. Bitcoin's layer twos are trying to do it. Ethereum with its hard forks is trying to do it. We think that we built a great blockchain and that it can, it's got the environmentally friendly stuff. So even compared to other proof of stake blockchains like Ethereum, the fact that it's extremely lightweight, efficient code, you can run it on Raspberry Pi. We've got this blockchain we're going on, and this is a different relationship to value. And the ultimate medium of exchange of value to me is Self-Frame. I'm gonna, run it on nodes all over the world. People will be able to exchange those cell tokens, other tokens, interoperability, a brand new way of relating to money. There we go, guys. We have gone deep today. Hope you all enjoyed it. This is Gleb for the Self-Frame content team. Self-Frame After Dark. Peace.